fellow American Martyrs Linc communities. It's such an honor to be with you and to be able to share a little bit more about the heart of God. I'm Father Tim Grumbach from St. Augustine's Parish in Culver City, and I'm just so grateful that you're willing to enter into this journey deeper and deeper into the heart of God. And so a little bit more into the heart of God, to recognize that the heart of God is a jealous heart, that the love of God is a jealous love. And so one of the confusing things first that we have to tackle is to be able to understand what it means for God to have a jealous heart. One of my favorite praise and worship songs, How He Loves, begins with the line, "He is jealous for me." One of my very good priest friends says he's had such trouble with that song, with that very line, because he thinks what it's doing is projecting our jealous hearts, our sinfulness onto God's heart, that somehow God can be wrapped up in that passionate emotion that we call jealousy, that we call envy even. But one of the things that we need to understand is that the heart of God can't be wrapped up in the same passion, the same envy, the same emotion, the same kind of jealousy that our heart's wrapped up into. So maybe a little distinction is an important place to start, is that we can talk about jealousy in such a way that it wraps our hearts in love, that we are jealous for what belongs to us, that what is rightfully ours. But we can also talk about jealousy with the word envy. Envy is something that wraps our hearts up rather in this great desire, this passionate desire for something that is not ours. So we will grasp for it, and we'll actually grasp for it at the expense of other people. But jealousy, a virtuous kind of jealousy, is something that grasps our heart, that we're really willing to expend ourselves for that which belongs to us, to pour ourselves out, to pour our love out because of a jealousy for that which belongs to us. Like a husband for his wife, or a wife for her husband, for a father or a mother for their child, and a child for their father and their mother. To have a jealous love is to be so wrapped up in the love for that person as to pour themselves out for it. That's the kind of love that we're talking about. That's the kind of jealousy that we're talking about when we say that God has a jealous heart. One of my favorite places to find this jealousy in God's heart is actually hidden in this very mysterious, very enigmatic answer that Jesus gives to the Pharisees who are trying to trick him in his speech, to ensnare him, to trap him, to get him in deeper trouble. It's the very powerful, very famous line where these Pharisees come to Jesus and they ask him the famous question, are we supposed to pay taxes to Caesar? And Jesus asks that infamous question, what do you pay this tax with? Show me the coin with which you pay this tax. And they pull out this coin ready to use as if they're ready to pay that tax. And Jesus looks at the coin and he sees the image on it. He says, whose image is this? And they quickly answer, well, that's Caesar's. And so Jesus, with this mic drop moment, says, repay to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and to God what belongs to God. Now, of course, it's easy for us to see, and we know the answer is what belongs to Caesar? Well, that coin that bears his image. But how often do we dive deeper and to say, well, what belongs to God? What are we supposed to repay to God? The answer is easy, to pay back to Caesar this coin which belongs to him. But how do we pay back to God what belongs to God? Well, if that coin bears Caesar's image, what bears God's image? We do. We bear God's image. We're to give God back what belongs to him. And so it's not like God is in some kind of competition with Caesar or any earthly ruler or any being at all. It's what Henry de Lubac would call God's non-competitive transcendence. Harking back to Thomas Aquinas, who says that God's not just another being among beings, somehow a supreme being, that somehow he's a bigger being than you and I, but rather he is being itself. His very being is his existence. And I know that sounds high and theological, but it gets to the heart of God and the heart of God's jealousy for that which belongs to him. And so the image of God we know from the very beginning of Scripture, and we dive deeper into the Old Testament, the very beginning of Scripture, we have this image of God. He merely speaks creation into being. He doesn't have to fight with any primordial other gods or any other powers. He merely speaks, and his word touches nothingness, and being unfolds. This God isn't in competition with anything or anyone else. And now we see the story about God creating the heavens and the earth in 6 days and then resting on the seventh. And we find ourselves thinking, well, how did he do that? How did he create? But that's not the question that the Israelites were asking when they started telling that story. What they were asking is, why did God create this? Why is what's happening to us now happening? When they were telling this story, they were in exile. Everything they knew and they loved had been destroyed. The temple, the very dwelling place of God, had been crushed, set on fire, and it had seemed to them, and they were being told that their God was weak, that their God was not jealous for them, that their God was envious and weak and had been defeated. But they tell this story that God is not fighting like the Babylonian gods, fighting with envy, grasping for power that's not theirs to begin with, but instead that their God is jealous for them, that he doesn't make mistakes, that he is created with order and love and purpose, and that what's happening to us is happening for a reason, because our God is jealous for us. And so they were struggling with their history, struggling with the way that God had broken into their history, but knowing the whole time and telling them that our God is jealous for us and that he doesn't make mistakes. We dive deeper and deeper into the Old Testament, to the heart of a God who's jealous for his people, that he doesn't make mistakes, and so that we aren't a mistake, that he is jealous for you, and he is jealous for me, and he is jealous for them, and he is jealous for every heart that bears his image, not Caesar's image, God's image. God is jealous for our hearts. And that's what makes his heart a jealous heart. One of the most powerful and profound images of this jealous heart of God, a heart that is willing to not turn in on itself, but to pour itself out, comes from the prophet Hosea. Chapter 11, verse 8, it says that my heart will be overturned out of love for my people. And it's in the context of talking about how Sodom and Gomorrah had been destroyed because of their idolatry, because of their hatred of God's people. And it uses the very same word for how Sodom and Gomorrah were overturned because of God's jealous love. And he says, I'm not going to overturn you. The prophet Hosea says, I'm not going to overturn you. I'm going to let my heart be overturned out of love for you. It's the same word. That God doesn't turn in on himself, but rather he empties himself. And so that when we see on the cross, the Gospel of John, chapter 19, verse 34, it says that God's very own heart on the cross was pierced, and out of it flowed blood and water. It's the fulfillment of Hosea's prophecy that God's heart would be overturned for love of his people. And so God's jealous heart is not a heart that turns in on ourselves like we do in our jealousy, but rather it empties itself out. It lets itself be overturned. And so the heart of our jealous God is a heart of a jealous love that doesn't grasp for that which does not belong to it, but rather empties itself out of love for that which does belong to it. He is jealous for you, and he is jealous for me.